This is a Lenovo Legion Go. This is the ROG Ally. This is the Amber. This is a PlayStation Portal. This is a PlayStation Portal? Hi, my name is Tired and I'm Joseph. And let me be clear, this video is a review of the Lenovo Legion Go, and I can compare it to the Asus ROG Ally I have here, but we need to talk. It's been an interesting couple of years for handhelds, but as a small channel, I'm just as much of a customer as you, but not everyone has the luxury of collecting them all. For some people, the first one they get is the only one they get, for better or worse. I acknowledge that this is a very first world problem to have, but it's crazy that when you get a new handheld, a new competitor is announced not even weeks after. What I'm getting at is, I've spent 2 weeks with the Lenovo Legion Go, and I like it, but I don't love it. Let's talk about that and ask if this could be the handheld for you, as well as what you should do as someone who keeps wanting to get a handheld in a year where they just keep coming out. If you're coming in from the 3-month ROG Ally review that I did over a month ago, welcome back. Thanks for sticking around. I appreciate all of you that were looking forward to this Legion Go review, and hey, so was I. But let's state the obvious. The OLED Steam Deck is the newest handheld available at the point that this video comes out. It was announced not even 2 weeks after the Legion Go came out, and the consensus is that it's basically a slight upgrade in every way. A slightly bigger screen that's now OLED, a slightly higher refresh rate from 60Hz to 90Hz, more battery life up to like 30% more, maybe 50, a slight performance upgrade, and a modernization of everything else like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, brightness, and even the speakers. On the flip side, it's still running a custom Linux OS called SteamOS. It's still only running at 800p, but it's still the cheapest device available, especially for a handheld of this scale. So why does it sound like I'm selling you the Steam Deck in a Legion Go review? It's because with the OLED Steam Deck fixing and improving on some of those things that made the LCD version the less appealing option, you may want to consider the options a bit more. Before that announcement, I could easily tell you to get the Legion Go over the Steam Deck at least. But now, I'm not sure. And with the Legion Go at roughly the same price as the top spec ROG Ally, we should look at what the Legion Go has going on for it and really see if it can stand out for more than just its size. I'll also be comparing it mostly to the ROG Ally, since A, it's the Windows competitor, and B, well, it's the only one I have. In the ROG Ally review, I mentioned that the Ally was my first handheld PC, and the Ally reignited my love for handheld devices in a way that the Nintendo Switch never really could, and in a way that I haven't felt this deeply since the PlayStation Vita. So, how does the Legion Go do against those standards? From the moment I opened the box, I was delighted to see how big, sleek, and powerful it looked, and turning it on for the first time made me even forget how it felt to turn on my Ally for the first time too. The very existence of this device nearly eclipsed my memory of the Switch. And hey, is that a case? Wow, imagine that. Okay, packaging aside, what's this thing got going on? Full disclosure, we're going to be coming at this purely from an everyday user kind of vibe. I'm not a super technical reviewer. I mean, we'll get into battery and like performance a little bit, but I can recommend some cool people to get better info from, but I can't keep up with all that teraflop and Megazord nonsense. I'm just gonna tell you what it is, what it's like to use it, and give you my raw feelings here. If you have one of these, bear with me, because I want to start with everything I don't like about this device, so we can end the conversation on a good note, because I overall still really do like this device. So I'm gonna get the biggest con out of the way. It's the software on this thing. It comes with the Legion Space app, which is the Legion sort of control panel equivalent to the Asus Armory Crate. It's a bit clunky, and it really only tries to sell you games before even trying to show you your library. It doesn't even give you curated recommendations. People on the Reddit for this device have even gone as far as to remove Legion Space from the startup programs. But thankfully, with the new update in week 2, Lenovo lets you disable it from opening on startup in the app. Still, you do need it to do some pretty basic stuff, like turning off the RGB on the controllers, or enabling resolution scaling, which apparently doesn't even work, at least right now. The other part of what makes this device so difficult to recommend is how much time and research you need to do to bring it up to its full potential. The ROG Ally at launch had like a 2-hour setup. Really, most of that was installing Windows updates and the Asus updates. Since then, I haven't really had to do much other than updating the BIOS every once in a while, but that's super simple. The Legion Go though, I feel like every day there's some new quirk or something to tweak. Even 2 weeks in, I don't really feel like I'm as settled as I was with the ROG Ally 2 weeks in. Armory Crate had its own issues at launch, but for the most part, it was usable and well designed. Today, if you wanted me to update the ROG Ally BIOS, I can start that process in less than a minute. But if you pointed a gun to my head and asked me to update the Lenovo's BIOS drivers, I'm dead. I don't know. Maybe it does it on its own when you boot the Legion space. And that sucks because these updates at this handheld level usually mean significant performance improvements, at least over time. It's not entirely fair to bash Lenovo for this kind of stuff on week 2 when the Ally is on month 5, but even recently, Asus added the option to assign 6GB of VRAM and scale resolution to 900p when Reddit users who hacked those settings in found that it offered the best performance for the device. Lenovo has come out and at least confirmed the 6GB option coming to the Legion, and hey, shout out to Ben Myers, the PM for this device. He's doing a really great job posting on all the support forums and letting us know about what changes are coming to the Legion. Still, I wonder how much of their priority queue is just playing catch up to devices like the ROG Ally. The Legion Go also did not come with an FPS limiter option, or with the ability to choose your own fan curves, but Ben says it's on the list. The next biggest gripe is that you do get a 144Hz and 60Hz mode that you can swap between, but not on the fly. You can weirdly go from 60 to 144Hz mode unplugged, but not the other way around. This is the first device to ask you to plug it into a power source before you can toggle the refresh rate. So if you're stuck on a plane with no outlet and you forgot to bring your device down from 144Hz down to 60, tough luck. There's people that are hacking in refresh rates like 90Hz and 40Hz, but it's causing issues with the touchscreen. So time will tell if Lenovo actually wants to patch in a 90 or 40Hz mode later. There are so many weird quirks to this device, like how the OEM graphics drivers are months behind the official AMD drivers, which makes quite a few frames of performance difference. The only options right now are to wait until Lenovo wants to give you the latest drivers themselves, or remove the included graphics drivers altogether and install the latest ones from AMD yourself. However, once this is said and done, it apparently breaks a few things that comes with the Legion, like the built-in performance monitor or the RSR functionality. Red Dead Redemption 2 apparently has issues with the screen because the Legion is configured as a portrait mode display rather than a landscape display. There's a ton of good videos about this stuff, so do your own research to see if you can foresee any of these issues coming up for games you play. And again, Ben at Lenovo says that they're looking into this, but it's not really guaranteed that we'll get a fix or we'll even get it soon. Okay, so bashing of Lenovo software aside, this thing is still running Windows. You can easily download Steam and use big picture mode like you would on the Steam Deck. And everything I said about Windows in the Ally video still stands. I'm glad I get to use all sorts of launchers and emulators just fine compared to the workarounds I've seen for the Steam Deck. One more thing, I didn't know where to put this, but hey, the Legion Go did not burn out the SD card reader. I used the same SD card from the Ally and it works just fine. So congrats Legion Go, you passed my bare minimum SD card test. One more small nitpick, the ROG Ally comes with a fingerprint reader on the power button. It saves your fingerprint when you turn it on, and when it works, it's nice. Like, it automatically signs you in. When it doesn't though, you have to put in your PIN for the device, and that's kind of the default experience on the Legion. There's this weird looking camera thing on it, which I thought was like Windows Hello, but it's apparently not a camera. People speculate that this is a light sensor, but no one has had their device automatically set their brightness or anything, so let me know if you know what this is. Moving on to the conversation about ergonomics, the conversation is going to bleed into a little bit about the software because the fun thing about this is the Joy-Cons, and that's what I'm going to keep calling them. I have some complaints. For example, can you guess where the start and the select buttons are? If you guessed right next to the screen on either side, then you'd be wrong. What would normally be the placement for start and select is actually the Lenovo software hotkeys. The left one opens up the full Legion Space app, and the right one opens up the side panels where you can do quick access settings like display resolution and refresh rate and all that. You can also use the left one as like a pre-configured hotkey thing. So for example, the Legion button and triangle swaps to power mode on the fly. Now you might think that's odd, but so then where are the select and start buttons on this thing? Oh, well, wait, they're... In order to make room for a trackpad on this thing, which the Ally didn't have and the Steam Deck does, I guess they still had to make the device look kinda decent, so Lenovo put both of those standard buttons towards the bottom of the left controller face. It's an uncomfortable adjustment that's still kinda weird after a week, but Ben from Lenovo says that they're looking into letting us remap them, so there's hope. But okay, so surprisingly, I'm done bashing the Legion Go. Those were basically my biggest complaints about everything. There's a bit more stuff that's weird, but we'll get into that. So, okay, what's good on this device? And still on ergonomics, I'd argue that everyone wants the best experience, quote unquote, for their device. And for some, that means the biggest device, since it can fit a bigger battery, a bigger screen, and maybe even do better cooling. For the ergonomics sake though, it's 50-50. I have thicker hands, so I can grip this thing pretty alright. However, it's still a lot of device to hold on to, especially when you're somewhere like in bed or just standing around in a line somewhere. After a few hours with it, you do get used to it, and every other handheld starts feeling like, what is this, a handheld made for ants? The ROG Ally, from my experience, well, it has a smaller shell, it has mushier buttons, but it's also much more comfortable for smaller hands, and it's also lighter. My biggest complaint with the Ally was that the build is a plastic white shell. It kind of feels hollow and cheap, almost like if you 3D printed a shell, and if you dropped it, it would break open like a Kinder Surprise egg or something. The Legion Go is on the opposite end of that spectrum. It's big, it's bulky, and it's heavy, but it's nice. It feels more machined, even though it's still plastic, just better feeling plastic. It could also just be that the black finish makes it feel more luxurious, less cheap, I don't know. Some reviewers are mentioning that the squared off edges of the Joy-Con really dig into your hands, but that hasn't been the case for me. They're not seamless, but it doesn't hurt or anything. And the face buttons here on the Legion Go are more firm and less mushy feeling than on the Ally, while still not being entirely clicky like on the Switch. The D-pad is clicky compared to the Ally's sort of circular 360 D-pad, and some people actually don't like this D-pad. It's mostly because of the shape of it. It's a cross-shaped D-pad, so it's only really left, up, down, right, and maybe you can combine some of the buttons if you reach your finger over, but it doesn't really allow for smooth transitions or cross-directional input like you would need in fighting games or even 2D platformers. I'm not a big platformer or even fighting games guy, so I prefer this clicky D-pad over the more rounded, omnidirectional, mushy feeling D-pad on the Ally. And more importantly for some, the Legion Go has Hall effect joysticks. Let me be honest, I'm not sure that I feel the difference too much. I don't get the hype. And apparently you can do these really well or really bad, but other than that, I mean, apparently they're more immune to stick drift. So it's nice to have it. They're comfortable, maybe a bit small, but that's all I have to say. Now, the Legion Go's controllers in general are sturdy. My biggest complaint about the Switch was that the Joy-Con rail felt a little cheap. Like, I remember the subtle but noticeable wiggling that the Joy-Cons do even when they sat on their rails. The Legion Go learned that lesson and instead uses a much more fixed slot to slide the controllers into rather than onto the device. As an aside, I was playing with this device in the passenger seat of a car when suddenly we got rear-ended. I was holding this thing in front of me and the impact made the right Joy-Con sort of break off. I thought it was done for and I would have to get it replaced, but it actually came out fine and popped right back into the slot with no issues or damage. Maybe I pulled it in the right direction when we did that, or maybe it was a miracle, but it could also just be damn good engineering. My only complaints with the Joy-Cons are twofold. One, there's no real indicator of when these are coming off or when they're firmly back on. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't afraid the first time that I thought I was breaking the device when I was doing this. And yeah, the Switch has a nice click when you slide the Joy-Cons all the way in. It's even part of their branding, but something like that is missing from the Legion Go. So you kind of have to just trust that you've pushed them in all the way. And two, they're weirdly configured. Like, since this is a Windows PC, some games or emulators will have wonky controller mappings. The way it seems as Lenovo configured these is with an Xbox 360 preset and an additional Xbox One preset. Mapping anything to these extra buttons on the back hasn't worked for me with that. It only works in some games where you can get an explicit key binding like in Overwatch. It's also really easy to accidentally press these back buttons, so I'm glad they don't do anything in most games out of the box. Still, the big selling point of these are for table mode and the FPS mode. Table mode being that kind of Nintendo Switch mode where you can just take the Joy-Cons off and play with the tablet on its kickstand and then having the Joy-Cons in your hand. Then there's FPS mode where you put the console on a table and you use a right Joy-Con like it's a mouse. I'll be honest, it was a cool gimmick, but I only used it once in a casual Overwatch match to test it out. I'm sure someone can find a reason to use it constantly. To me, I just found it less compelling since I wouldn't think to use this anywhere else. Maybe as a mouse when you're just browsing it like a tablet, but I'm not gonna go to a coffee shop and start playing Apex on the table with the cafe Wi-Fi. If I'm at home, I'll probably play shooters on my keyboard and mouse. But if you're a gamer on a budget, or you're looking to get into the PC scene with a handheld like this, then hey, go nuts, it works. You may need to configure your buttons, but it works. But the ROG Ally had some interesting developments in the fan area. People thought that the Ally was super quiet at first, but that ran warm, and it later theorized that this was causing the SD card readers frying, since all the heat would go over to that general area. Since then, Asus has done a lot of work to improve their fan curves and also balance heat and noise. But hey, for the most part, sometimes I forget that the ROG Ally even had fans that turn on. With the Legion Go though, I definitely noticed them, especially in the first few days. It got to the point with Assassin's Creed Mirage that I felt bad playing this at night, and I didn't trust it to not wake up my girlfriend sleeping next to me. Yes, they were that loud. I don't mind the fans during the day, but at night, I prefer if they were a bit more quiet without having to sacrifice performance all the way down to the quiet 5-watt setting. Okay, so sitting in between the Joy-Cons, the next obvious thing is that this device is massive, with with a big screen. And with a great screen comes...
Don't you dare finish that sentence! Don't do it! I'm sick of it.
The Legion Go is rocking an 8.8-inch IPS screen, capable of running at 2560 by 1600 at 144 Hz. I'm going to give you a minute to think about that sentence because what is that doing on a handheld device? And get this, after the Steam Deck OLED, the Ally will technically have the smaller screen, assuming that you don't take the non-OLED model into account. And the Legion Go will still have the biggest screen of the bunch. I don't think any manufacturer after this should be making a bigger display than this. That being said, the DNA of the Legion Go is part gaming handheld and part tablet. Like, it looks like someone just glued Joy-Cons to an iPad mini and fattened it up a little bit. But it's actually not terrible, since you can use this as a tablet if you kind of just want to browse the Steam store or even do some web browsing, or hell, even play Marvel Snap. However, the Legion Go is running the same chipset as the Asus ROG Ally, and the ROG Ally rarely got to take full advantage of its own more modest 1080p 120Hz display, unless you were playing indie games or emulating older games. As a handheld, the device doesn't have the power to run most AAA games at the full potential of this display, but at 8.8 inches, I'd argue that you're not going to notice much of a difference from 1600p and 1200p. Also, the Legion is running with a taller 16:10 aspect ratio like the Steam Deck, as opposed to the standard 16:9 that's on the Ally and most monitors. So some games or emulators will run across the issue of black bars on the top or the sides of this device. But more important than that, Lenovo didn't include a VRR display on this device. For those that don't know what it means, because I actually didn't before this, VRR stands for variable refresh rate. Basically, it means that this device can raise or lower its own refresh rate according to the content on it, so that if you're running at a lower frame rate, it just becomes less noticeable. I didn't get the controversy behind this decision to not include it, but after I launched Disco Elysium on both this and the Ally, which the Ally does have variable refresh rate, the difference was a bit jarring. Lenovo argues that by having a higher refresh rate, the amount of drop frames will be less noticeable due to how many refreshes the screen is doing, but they're just flat out wrong. In my opinion, the Steam Deck OLED is making the right sense out of all these devices. Sure, it's still only 800p, but the refresh rate on the OLED is coming in at 90 Hz. If you ask me, that's perfect. I've never gotten more than 90 frames on most games like Spider-Man, unless I'm cranking the power settings and lowering the resolution, ultimately losing some of that portability and pizzazz of the device. On the topic of portability, one of the more important things about a handheld is battery life. Again, for the sake of not getting too technical, I want to cut right to the chase. The Asus ROG Ally will die before the Legion Go in most cases. I tested the battery by running Spider-Man Remastered on the 3 different performance modes of each device, and the results were that in the best case, the Legion Go will last 3 hours and 15 minutes, and in the best case, the Ally will last 2 hours. In the worst case, the Legion Go will last 1 hour and 30 minutes, while the Ally will die closer to 50 minutes. These are all slightly estimated, but mostly rounded down, but you get the gist. The Ally has been known for having the worst battery between itself and the Steam Deck, but now it's 3rd place. However, I have to explain some things that I found on the performance side that may be causing this, because again, both devices are running the same AMD chipset, but both devices are also choosing to use the power of the chip and their batteries differently. The first thing I noticed was the way that the lowest presets behave, the main difference being that the ROG Ally uses a 10-watt TDP mode and the Legion Go uses 8 watts still. The Legion Go does have a larger battery, and it uses it less on this setting, which would explain the insanely large 1 hour gap. The next preset up gave us even more things to notice, and I'll have to jump ahead to the emulation section a bit here, but I was trying to run Tears of the Kingdom through the Yuzu emulator, which I've done on the Ally successfully. I've always gotten a steady 30 FPS at the 15-watt mode on the Ally, give or take a few frames on the more chaotic sections of gameplay or when Yuzu needs to cache a shader, but I've been really happy with it. On the Legion Go though, even after I gave it time to run and ran around to cache some shaders in the test area, I rarely got over 20 FPS with Vulkan, when again, the Ally using Vulkan ran 30 comfortably. I switched to OpenGL and I got a few more frames, but that doesn't really solve the discrepancy that's going on here. I was a bit dumbfounded at the difference though, nearly putting it down to the drivers not being as fleshed out, but then I noticed that the Legion wasn't using the full 20 watts of the performance mode. I plugged in the device to see if it was being thrifty with power, and that did yield surprising results. It reached 30 FPS instantly, and it stayed there, also letting itself use a little more power than the 15-watt mode. A question then arose in my mind. is Lenovo purposefully configuring the Legion Go to use less of the power of the C1 Extreme chip in order to come ahead in terms of battery life and cooling. And yes, I say cooling because in most of the testing at 15 watts, when the game was heavy enough, the Ally did allow itself to go up to 20 or even 25 watts, sometimes even 30, which resulted in temperatures peaking at 80 or 90 degrees. But the Legion Go rarely allowed itself to go past 15 watts, and as a result stayed cooler at 60 degrees Celsius. Even in the 25 watt mode, the ROG Ally lets itself use around 30 and peak at around 45 watts, but the Legion Go actually rarely lets itself ever go past 20. And so the ROG Ally hits temperatures around 90 degrees, while the Legion stays at around 60 and 70. So I'm no longer doubting that the heating issues on the Ally are what caused the SD card reader issue. And yeah, there's a huge difference to how these devices use their fans. The Asus rarely uses them, but the Legion Go isn't afraid to crank them out and sound like a jet engine. And it's controversial because it comes down to preference. Do you prefer a quiet device or a cool device? Do you prefer when your device gives a game everything it's got to run well, or do you prefer if your device holds back a little bit to let you run the game longer? I didn't even think that this would be a conversation to have, but I guess we need to have it. So here, let me cut to the chase and give you everything you need to know about performance. In most cases, the Legion can keep up with the Ally, give or take a few frames, which is impressive when you consider that the Legion is using a lower TDP and also running at a slightly higher 16:10 resolution. But as a handheld device, sometimes you're going to need that extra wattage, especially when you're purposefully using a turbo mode to get the most out of the device, which sometimes comes in handy when you're doing emulation. Speaking of emulation, you've seen a little bit of it here already. In the ROG Ally review, I didn't really talk about emulation, but since the Legion Go is basically a Nintendo Switch handheld, I figured I should talk about it at least a little bit. My emulation consoles of choice are the GameCube, the PS2, the PS3, and the Switch. I'm happy to report that they all run fine on the Legion, given the context that I gave in the battery section. But even unplugged, Super Mario Bros. Wonder runs perfectly fine. I'm not an emulator diehard guy. I don't need my PS2 games to run at 8K 240 FPS. I just want to play some older games, and it helps if they scale up a little bit. Playing Lollipop Chainsaw on the ROG Ally at 10 watts, 30 FPS in the car was an amazing experience. And on a display like the Legion's, it's even more amazing. But there are a few differences in frames between the Legion and the Ally. Overall, I'm happy for the performance on this device for the emulators that I use. I don't really emulate Game Boy games on these bigger handhelds ever since I got the Ambernic, so for PS2, PS3, GameCube, and Switch, it's comfortable enough. Okay, so that's basically the bulk of the Legion Go review, and ultimately, yeah, I do like it, and I think it does some things pretty well, but I wouldn't say that it's a clear choice over the ROG Ally, which I've had for 5 months. It's not to the point where I'd consider returning the Legion Go, but I'm keeping it for one main reason which may not make sense, and that is that I like the potential that this device has. If this device can mature by fleshing out its software and optimizing its chipset to the point that the Ally has 5 months in, then I think it could be a clear winner. Again, buying and keeping a device for the sake of potential is not the experience most people will be looking for in their first and only device. With that in mind then, if you had to pick one, which one of the big 3 devices is best for you? Starting with the main character of this video, the best thing about the Legion Go is the display, and that's both in terms of size and resolution. If we're being OS agnostic, the Steam Deck OLED is going to have a more color accurate display and give you a longer battery life, while having the most fleshed out of the softwares. If you only want to play your Steam library, or are willing to work around Linux to get other launchers going, or you want the longest battery life and you didn't care about performance and an 800p screen, then get the Deck OLED. If we're talking about only the Windows handhelds, then consider what we talked about earlier. You're going to have to choose a device that aligns to how you want to use it here. If you don't care that much about a smaller display, and you just want a device that can play every game your Windows PC does with as little fiddling as possible, or you just want a smaller, more portable device, and mature device while we're at it, then get the ROG Ally. Keeping in mind that it will run shorter and hotter for just a few frames of difference between the Legion. If you want a bit more battery life, the biggest screen, the highest refresh rate without VRR, great colors for an LCD display, and you like the funny little Joy-Con thing that this device has going on, then get yourself a Legion Go. But consider everything we've talked about. You're going to be taking a gamble with Lenovo support this device long term. Right now, there's a roadmap going up until December for some of the improvements we need, but not everything. And again, remember that in some cases, the Legion may be a little less performant than the Ally. That being said, I do have another flight coming up, and I'm thinking I'll probably take the ROG Ally. Really, I'm grateful to have the Ally here to rely on while I wait for the Legion Go to mature a little longer. If I had to give you an analogy, it's this. The Lenovo Legion Go is like having a car in your garage that you only really drive around on the weekend because you like the way it looks. It may not be your fastest car, it may not be your most reliable car, but it's a joy you give yourself because you can, knowing that you have a more efficient and reliable everyday driver, which is the Ally in this case. But again, not everyone gets to fill out even a 2-car garage, and if you're getting your first car, choose carefully, and remember that eventually there will be even more cars that will improve on what the cars of today are already already doing. So why hasn't the video ended just yet? Well, I have a few more things that I want to say about the handheld industry and the community as well. With the console wars having seemingly died out and the handheld wars starting to wage in the foreground, every device that comes out, a Reddit or a Discord group springs out, and I think it's awesome to see how people support and hype each other up for their device. That being said, it's hard not to notice an interesting amount of tribalism that comes with each device. And it's a weird dynamic where some people will jump ship for the next best thing, but others will find all sorts of things to bring the other device down. I think that's just the point in the market. If everybody made the same exact device, then it would come down to brand loyalty, or price, or simply who does it first. While it can be a bit confusing as a consumer that just wants to buy the one device to play your games on the go and relive that PS Vita nostalgia, it's also good to have options. With the release of the OLED Steam Deck coming as a complete surprise, it's almost like any company can just pull the trigger and release their new handheld without a warning. There were the rumblings of the Alienware handheld, and I'm surprised it hasn't already come out, to be honest. But it's like looming in the background, kind of like an MCU villain at the end credits. There's always a possibility also of the Steam Deck 2, or the Legion Go 2, or even the ROG Ally 2. Let's not forget that there's other small manufacturer devices like the GPD Win or the Neo device. Whatever device you get, know that right now at least, there isn't one perfect choice, only better choices for different people. There are the people who mostly get these to mostly use around the house, or since they share their gaming rig or their TV with someone else, or maybe situations where you don't have enough space or your own space for a whole PC. And even still, you get to take your gaming device anywhere in the world with you. And those differences are why I think handhelds are so exciting. To think that everyone uses their device differently, but we can all still come together to discuss drivers, what games we're playing, and all sorts of other stuff. So mushy gushy talk aside for a second, I do have something. While the Ally video did really well and did a lot of good for the channel, I don't want to only be a handheld review channel. This is video 4 for the channel, and it's the second handheld video. It just happened to be the timing of these videos and my decision to get the Legion lined up pretty early with the creation of the channel. And I just want to talk about video games in general, and maybe some devices that I find interesting here and there. While I may want to get a newer device like the OLED deck, if it's not super interesting or I can't say anything about it, then I don't really want to make a video. Like a month ago, I got the Anbernic RG35XX, and I love this little thing, but for the life of me, I just can't find anything to say about it other than the fact that it's a nice, cute, nostalgic, but modern take on playing my favorite Game Boy games. Or the PlayStation Portal, which doesn't spark any desire in me, especially when I already bought the PlayStation branded Backbone 1 to use with PS Remote Play on my phone, which just feels like a Portal Mini now. So, okay, I've rambled enough. And if you stuck around this long, thank you so much for listening. And if you're one of the nearly 500 subscribers that we've gotten since the Ally video, thank you for joining while I'm still figuring out my voice on this thing we call a platform. We're going to keep talking about gaming and video games in general. And while I do say that I don't really want to be a handheld channel, I also say never say never. So there may one day come another device that makes me want to present it to y'all and give you my perspective, but until then, if you like my style of review and digging deep into stuff, check out my Spider-Man video. I put basically the same amount of time of effort into it, if not more, and I want to talk about Spider-Man some more. Either way, whatever rings your bell, subscribe if you want to, like the video if you do, and see you next time.